They never expected your calm. That's the first truth, and it's the one that flips the entire story. Because when an avoidant pulls away, rejects, delays, or disappears, they are not prepared for peace. They are prepared for pursuit. They are prepared for the emotional chase, the long paragraph, the apology you don't owe, the questions you ask just to keep them present. They are prepared for you to do what you've always done: reach, repair, soften, reassure, try again. And when you don't, when you become quiet, grounded, and emotionally still, it doesn't just surprise them, it shakes the foundation of the dynamic they were unconsciously relying on. Calm is not silence because you're weak. Calm is silence because you are finished negotiating with chaos. To the super empath, calm often arrives after exhaustion. It arrives after you realize that your nervous system has been living in a constant state of scanning, waiting, interpreting, overthinking, hoping, and healing someone who keeps stepping away. Calm arrives after you've poured your love into a room that keeps closing its doors. Calm arrives after you stop confusing effort with love, and you start valuing peace as proof of self-respect. But to the avoidant, calm looks like something else. Calm looks like loss of control. Because avoidants don't just avoid intimacy, many avoid emotional exposure. They've learned to regulate themselves through distance, through ambiguity, through being the one who can step back first. That doesn't always mean they don't care. It means their system feels safer when they're not emotionally cornered. They can handle you loving them from far away. They can handle you wanting them quietly. They can handle you staying available while they remain half present. What they struggle with is a love that requires full presence, full accountability, full consistency. That kind of love demands them to be seen, and being seen is terrifying when your coping style is to hide. So when they pull away, they often expect the dynamic to follow a predictable script. You react. You chase. You try to fix. You give them proof they still matter. You keep the connection alive while they keep their distance. That predictable script is soothing to them, because even if they feel pressured by intimacy, they still know they can retreat and you'll remain attached. That attachment becomes their silent reassurance, their safety net. It tells them, even if I don't show up fully, I'm still wanted. Now look at what calm does. Calm removes the script. Calm takes away your predictable reaction. Calm refuses to perform. Calm stops providing emotional proof. And without that proof, the avoidant is forced to sit with uncertainty, the one emotional state they hate most. Uncertainty says, you might actually lose this person. Uncertainty says, you might not be able to return whenever you feel like it. Uncertainty says, your behavior has consequences, and consequences are uncomfortable because consequences demand accountability, and accountability demands emotional maturity. And emotional maturity requires the one they've avoided, sitting with feelings instead of running from them. That's why calm hurts them more than a fight ever could. When you fight, you are still engaged. When you cry, you are still attached. When you send paragraphs, you are still invested. Even when you're angry, you're still giving energy, attention, and emotional presence. And that presence keeps the avoidant anchored to an old belief. I can pull away and still be chased. Your reaction, no matter how painful, confirms their importance. It confirms they still have access to your emotions. It confirms they still matter enough to move you. But calm is different. Calm says, I am no longer available to be moved like this. Calm says, I will not chase someone who keeps choosing distance. Calm says, if you want access to me, it must come with respect. And that is why calm becomes the shock. It is not an emotional outburst, it is an emotional boundary. It is the super empath finally choosing stability over hope, reality over potential, self-respect over craving. This is also why calm triggers the avoidance ego wound. Not ego like arrogance, ego like identity. Many avoidants carry a quiet identity that says, I'm the one who leaves first. They feel safer when they can control the exit, because if they control the exit, they never have to feel abandonment. They never have to feel powerless. They never have to feel like the one who was left behind. Your calm flips that identity. Now they are not the only one who can detach. Now you are the one who can disappear without chaos. Now you are the one who can walk away without begging. And that is the pain they never expected, the pain of realizing they can't control the story anymore. So what happens inside them next is not always love at first. It's restlessness, it's checking, it's scanning. It's their nervous system reaching for certainty. They'll look for signs you're still attached. They'll look for proof you still care. They'll try to trigger a reaction, sometimes by sending a breadcrumb, sometimes by appearing casual, sometimes by acting like nothing happened. Because a reaction from you would restore the old balance. A reaction would mean the script is back. But your calm doesn't give them that. And that is the moment the emotional truth begins to reveal itself. Not through words, but through absence. Because calm is a mirror. It reflects how much you used to carry. It reflects how much they relied on your loyalty. It reflects how much they took for granted. And for the first time, they are left alone with the empty space where your energy used to be, and that empty space is louder than any argument you could have made, because it asks the question they never wanted to answer. What if I pushed away someone who loved me deeply, and they finally stopped trying, and I can't undo it with one message, one excuse, one breadcrumb, because their calm is not a phase, it is a decision. A super empath doesn't detach in one day. That's the second keynote. And it matters because it destroys the biggest illusion avoidants live inside. Avoidants often believe the person who loves them will keep loving them no matter what, because they've seen the empath bend, forgive, rationalize, and return again and again. They assume your heart is an endless resource. They assume your patience doesn't have a limit. They assume if they pull back, you will push forward. If they go cold, you will warm the connection. If they disappear, you will search for them emotionally and physically. So when you finally detach, it looks sudden to them, like a switch flipped overnight. But for you, it was a slow, invisible death of hope. Detachment is not a moment. It is a build-up. It is 1,000 micro wounds that didn't look dramatic to anyone else, but they changed you. It's the way your chest tightened every time you saw their delayed replies. It's the way your stomach sank when you noticed the pattern, warm one day, distant the next. It's the way your nervous system learned to stay on alert, scanning tone, timing, energy, because love with them never felt stable, it felt conditional. And because you're a super empath, you didn't just notice it, you felt it in your body. You felt the emotional temperature drop. You felt the shift before they even admitted it. You felt the avoidance in their silence, the withdrawal in their "I'm just busy," the hidden pushback when you asked for something simple like clarity. And at first, you explained it away. You gave them empathy like it was medicine. They're stressed. They've been hurt before. They don't know how to communicate. They're scared. You looked for the wound behind the behavior, and because you could see the wound, you started treating them like a healing project instead of a partner. You became the emotional translator. You became the one who made their coldness make sense. You became the one who took the hit so the relationship could keep breathing. But every time you did that, a small part of you paid a price. You paid with self-doubt. You paid with overthinking. You paid with shrinking your needs. You paid with the quiet humiliation of being loyal to someone who gave you uncertainty. You paid with the constant feeling that you were almost chosen but never fully held. And the super empath can endure a lot because they believe in people, they feel potential, they imagine the best version of someone and they keep loving that version, even when the real version keeps disappointing them. So detachment begins in tiny moments that look harmless, but they accumulate like water behind a dam. It begins the first time you express a need and they act like you're asking for too much. It begins the first time you share a feeling and they go quiet, and you end up comforting yourself. It begins the first time you ask for clarity and they give you fog. It begins the first time they promise and then disappear, and you pretend it didn't hurt as much as it did. It begins the first time you realize you're carrying the emotional weight alone, and you still stay. These moments are the real injury, because they teach your nervous system a painful lesson. Love here is not safe. Love here is effort without return. Love here is giving without receiving. And each time you swallow that truth, you train yourself to accept less than you deserve. Now here's what the avoidant doesn't understand. The empath doesn't detach because they stop loving. They detach because they stop abandoning themselves. They detach because one day their body refuses to participate. Their nervous system says, "I can't do this anymore." Their heart says, "I can't keep bleeding quietly." Their mind says, "I've seen this pattern too many times to call it hope." And then comes the moment everyone thinks is the switch. That moment is usually calm. It's not a breakup fight. It's not a dramatic exit. It's a quiet exhaustion where you realize that explaining again won't change anything, because you've already explained in every tone, every mood, every language. You've been patient, you've been kind, you've been understanding, you've been soft. You've tried to talk, you've tried to repair, you've tried to meet them halfway, and halfway became your entire life. So you detach, not with hatred, with clarity. And the reason it shocks them is because they didn't see the 1,000 disappointments. They only saw your loyalty. They didn't feel the micro cuts. They only enjoyed the way you kept showing up. They didn't register the moments you went to bed feeling lonely beside the connection. They only noticed you were still there the next day. Your pain was quiet, so they treated it like it wasn't real. Your forgiveness was constant, so they treated it like it was guaranteed. But love isn't guaranteed when it's starved. Even the super empath reaches a limit. And when that limit is reached, detachment is not a choice, it's a survival response. It's the nervous system finally protecting you from more damage. It's your heart finally choosing peace over potential. It's you realizing that understanding someone's wounds does not require you to keep accepting their patterns. And once you detach like that, it's not easy to go back, because you didn't leave in anger, you left in acceptance. You accepted what they are capable of right now, and you stopped trying to force them into what you wished they could be. That's why the avoidant panics later, because they believed your love would keep tolerating the cycle. But you didn't detach suddenly. You detached after 1,000 small disappointments, and each disappointment taught you the same lesson. Love that cost your self-respect is not love you're willing to pay for anymore. The third keynote is the uncomfortable truth that changes everything. The avoidant didn't just get used to you, they got comfortable in what your empathy provided. They got used to a kind of love that made their life emotionally easier, even while it made your life emotionally heavier. Not because they were necessarily plotting to use you, but because the dynamic rewarded them. Your compassion became a cushion. Your understanding became a shield. Your patience became a permission slip. And when someone receives the benefits of love without having to carry the responsibilities of love, they rarely notice how much they're taking until the supply is gone. A super empath doesn't love halfway. A super empath feels deeply, reads energy, senses shifts, and tries to repair before the damage becomes visible. You noticed their withdrawal before they admitted it. You felt their mood change before they explained it. You sensed the distance building, and you instinctively tried to close it with reassurance, with kindness, with softness, with, "I'm here." And in the beginning that feels beautiful, because you believe love is meant to soothe, love is meant to heal, love is meant to understand. So you became the person who created emotional safety in the relationship, even when the other person did not know how to provide it back. That's where their comfort begins, in your emotional labor. Because every time they pulled away and you stayed kind, they learned, I can retreat and still be loved. Every time they went cold and you kept the connection warm, they learned, I don't have to show up consistently for this to continue. Every time they avoided a hard conversation and you softened your needs, they learned, I can escape discomfort and still keep access. And access is the key word here. Many avoidants don't crave intimacy the way an empath does. They crave the comfort of being wanted without the pressure of being responsible for someone's heart. They like the safety of knowing you care. They like the relief of being forgiven. They like the emotional home you provide. But they don't like the weight of being accountable to it. So they stay in a space where you are emotionally invested, and they are emotionally protected. And because you are a super empath, you don't just tolerate that, you rationalize it. You tell yourself they're scared, they've been hurt, they need time. If I'm patient, they'll open up. That's what makes the empath so powerful and so vulnerable at the same time. You can see the wounded child behind the adult behavior, and you start loving the child, not holding the adult accountable. You start giving them grace in moments where they should be giving you consistency. So their comfort becomes unconscious. They stop noticing your effort as effort. They start seeing it as normal. They start expecting it. Your loyalty becomes predictable, and predictable love becomes something people take for granted if they don't have the emotional maturity to value it. They think, this person always comes back. This person always understands. This person always forgives. And because they believe that they don't fear consequences, they don't feel urgency, they don't feel the need to grow quickly, because the relationship keeps surviving on your emotional work. Now here's the part that hits hard. Your empathy becomes the very thing that delays their growth. Not because empathy is wrong, but because empathy without boundaries becomes a substitute for accountability. If you keep soothing someone every time they hurt you, they never have to sit with the discomfort of what they've done. If you keep explaining your pain while still staying accessible, they never have to earn your presence. If you keep making it easy for them to return without repair, they never have to become the kind of person who knows how to repair. So when you finally detach, it feels like betrayal to them, even though it's actually consequence. It feels sudden, even though it's been building. It feels unfair, even though they were warned in 100 gentle ways. Because in their mind, you were the stable one, you were the soft place. You were the person who understood. You were the person who would keep loving through anything. They didn't realize that your understanding was costing you your peace, that your forgiveness was costing you your self-respect, that your patience was costing you your nervous system. And this is why the avoidant struggles when you detach, because they lose more than you. They lose the emotional translator. They lose the person who turned their distance into something tolerable. They lose the person who made their inconsistency survivable. They lose the person who kept the relationship alive when they weren't showing up. They lose the comfort of being able to retreat without real loss. That comfort is addictive because it allows them to avoid the discomfort of intimacy while still receiving the benefits of connection. But once it's gone, they can't replace it easily, because most people won't do what a super empath does. Most people won't stay that patient. Most people won't keep translating. Most people won't keep giving. The super empath is rare. And the avoidant doesn't fully recognize the rarity until they're facing the silence. And this keynote is where you, as the empath, reclaim your power. You stop romanticizing your role as the one who understands. You stop taking pride in being able to endure what you shouldn't have to endure. You stop thinking love means tolerating inconsistency. You realize that the relationship didn't survive because it was healthy. It survived because you were carrying it. And detachment is the moment you put it down, not to punish them, to save yourself. Because the moment you stop being their emotional home, they are forced to confront what they've avoided. Either they grow up and show up, or they lose the one person who loved them in a way they were not prepared to earn. The fourth keynote is the one that finally exposes what the avoidant was relying on without even realizing it. Their pain is not always romantic longing. It's the panic of losing control. And that's why the emotional aftermath looks strange from the outside. People expect tears, apology speeches, dramatic confessions. But what many avoidants feel first is agitation, restlessness, irritation, and a quiet internal alarm they can't easily name. Because what just happened isn't simply that you left. What happened is that the rules changed. For an avoidant, the relationship often runs on a hidden structure. They control the pace, they control the distance, and they control the access. They decide when closeness happens and when it stops. They decide when messages are answered, when conversations get deep, when the energy feels warm, and when it becomes cold. That control isn't always a conscious plan. It's a nervous system strategy. It's how they stay safe. The moment they feel too seen, they create distance. The moment they feel pressure, they withdraw. The moment intimacy starts demanding consistency, they escape into silence or vagueness. And for a long time, that system works because the empath keeps trying to repair the gaps. So the avoidant learns something, even if they never say it out loud. I can step back and the connection will still be there. That belief becomes their emotional insurance policy. It lets them keep you close enough to soothe loneliness, but far enough to avoid responsibility. It lets them treat you as an option without admitting they're doing it. It lets them avoid the hard work of stable love while still receiving the benefits of being loved. But detachment destroys their insurance policy. When a super empath finally detaches, they don't just stop talking, they stop being available to be managed. They stop responding on cue. They stop filling the silence. They stop chasing the conversation. They stop providing emotional proof that you still belong to the cycle. And that's why the avoidant experiences the first wave of pain as a loss of control, not because they're heartless, but because control was how they regulated their fear. Control was how they avoided vulnerability. Control was how they stayed powerful enough to never feel abandoned. Now they are the one who can't predict the outcome. Now they are the one sitting in uncertainty. Now they are the one wondering, are they moving on? Are they talking to someone else? Did I finally push too far? And uncertainty is torture for an avoidant nervous system, because uncertainty forces emotion to rise. Emotion forces memory to rise. Emotion forces attachment to wake up. That's why the avoidant starts checking. They check your social media. They check your activity. They check if you're still around. They may not even message at first, they just scan. Because scanning gives them a sense of control. It gives them data. It gives them something to hold. And if they can still see you, still feel your presence, still detect your attachment, they can calm themselves. But your detachment gives them nothing. No co-paragraphs, no drama, no access. So the mind begins filling the blank space with imagination, and imagination is where fear grows. They begin replaying moments they dismissed. They begin remembering your loyalty in a way they never allowed themselves to when you were still available. They begin feeling the absence like a cold room, because your energy used to warm the dynamic. Your effort used to keep things alive. Your forgiveness used to soften consequences. Without you doing that, they feel the raw truth of their own pattern. And this is where the ego wound shows up, the wound that says, I'm not the one who leaves first anymore. Avoidants often carry a hidden pride in their ability to detach. They believe detaching means strength. They believe needing is weakness. They believe carrying too much is dangerous. So they position themselves as the one who can walk away. It's a safety posture. But when you detach cleanly, you expose that posture for what it is, fear wearing the costume of independence. Your detachment tells them, you are not the only one who can leave. Your detachment tells them, Your distance has consequences. Your detachment tells them, I can love deeply and still choose myself. And that's the pain they never expected. Because they expected you to stay emotionally attached enough to keep them safe. They expected you to keep proving your love. They expected your heart to remain available. They expected that even if they didn't commit, you wouldn't disappear. So what do they do to regain control? They reach in a way that protects their pride. They don't come in with full vulnerability, they come in small. A breadcrumb, a casual hey, a random question, a reaction. Something that tests if the door still opens. Because if you respond quickly, the avoidance nervous system relaxes, control returns, uncertainty drops. They think, okay, I still have access. But if you don't, if you remain calm and detached, their discomfort grows. Because now they are forced to face the one reality they've avoided. They can actually lose someone who loved them. And that reality forces a decision. Either they step forward with more maturity, more honesty, more effort, because they can feel the option slipping away, or they retreat deeper, because stepping forward would require the emotional responsibility they've spent their whole life avoiding. This keynote is not about demonizing them. It's about seeing the real mechanism. Their first pain is not always love, it is exposure, it is consequence. It is the loss of control. And once you understand that, you stop being confused by their behavior, you stop taking their restlessness as romance, and you start protecting your peace like it matters more than being an option in someone's half-hearted story. The fifth keynote is the mirror moment, the moment absence removes numbness. Because when you were present, when you were still reachable, still forgiving, still explaining, the avoidant could stay emotionally anesthetized. They could tell themselves stories that kept them comfortable. They could minimize the relationship, downplay your value, focus on your flaws, or focus on pressure, instead of their own avoidance. They could keep you in a category that made them feel safe, the category available. And as long as you were available, they didn't have to fully face the impact of their behavior, because the consequences were softened by your empathy. But when you detach, something changes. Your absence becomes a mirror, and the mirror doesn't argue, it doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it simply reflects reality back to them. It reflects how much you carried. It reflects how much you tolerated. It reflects how much you gave without being met. It reflects the emotional labor you performed quietly to keep the connection alive. And it also reflects something that is very hard for an avoidant to sit with, the truth that their pattern didn't just happen, it hurt someone. This is where people misunderstand the avoidant's regret. They think regret is instant. They think it arrives as a clean apology. They imagine a dramatic realization where the avoidant suddenly becomes emotionally fluent and confesses everything. But for most avoidants, the process is slow, because their nervous system is built to avoid uncomfortable feelings. When discomfort rises, they distract. They stay busy, they numb. They rationalize, they replace. They do anything to keep from sitting in the stillness where truth becomes unavoidable. Your absence creates that stillness. And in that stillness, memories start to surface. Not just the memories they cherry-pick to justify leaving, but the real ones. The ones they pushed down. The ones that made them feel something. They remember your loyalty in moments you don't even remember. The way you showed up when they were moody. The way you stayed kind when they were cold. The way you tried to communicate without attacking. The way you tried to repair instead of punish. They remember the softness they received, the patience they were given, the emotional safety that was offered without a guarantee they deserved it. And here is the cruel irony. They often remember it most clearly when it's too late to easily access it. Because when you were there, they could assume you'd stay. Assumption creates numbness. Familiarity creates numbness. Predictability creates numbness. When someone is always there, the mind stops treating them as a loss risk. It stops valuing them urgently. It treats them like emotional furniture, something stable in the room that will still be there tomorrow. And that's not because the avoidant is evil. It's because avoidance relies on emotional distance, and emotional distance makes everything feel less real. But absence makes it real. Absence breaks the numbness. Absence forces the nervous system to register loss, and loss is the emotion that wakes up attachment, even in avoidance. Because even avoidants attach, they just suppress attachment until there is threat. When there is threat, when the option disappears, when the door feels like it's closing, their attachment system wakes up and begins scanning for what mattered. This is why they start replaying. They replay your voice, your words, your reactions. They replay the moment you stopped. They replay the final conversation. They analyze it not just to understand you, but to understand what they lost. They begin to see patterns they didn't want to admit, the pattern where you were the one carrying consistency, and they were the one escaping it. The pattern where you were offering love, and they were offering ambiguity. The pattern where you were trying to build, and they were trying to stay comfortable. Now this mirror moment creates an emotional split inside them. Part of them wants to blame you because blame protects the ego. Blame says, you were too needy. You were too intense. You asked for too much. But your detachment makes that blame harder to hold because you didn't explode, you didn't scream, you didn't beg. You stepped back calmly. And calm detachment is hard to demonize. Calm detachment removes their favorite narrative that you were the problem. Because if you left peacefully, it suggests something uncomfortable, that you left because you were tired of carrying something alone. So the blame weakens, and when blame weakens, accountability tries to enter. Not full accountability yet, but glimpses of it. They start recognizing moments they were unfair, moments they were distant, moments they avoided a real conversation, moments they took your presence for granted. And this is where the pain becomes deeper than missing you. It becomes grief for themselves. Grief for the version of themselves they could have been if they had the courage to receive love properly. Grief for the relationship that could have been safe if they had done the work. Grief for the truth that they didn't lose you because you weren't enough. They lost you because they wouldn't show up. That truth is heavy. Heavy enough to make them reach. Heavy enough to make them test the door. Heavy enough to make them send a message, not always a good one, but a message. Because reaching is an attempt to soften the mirror. If they can regain access, they can numb the loss again. If they can get a response, they can tell themselves nothing is final. If they can reopen the channel, they don't have to sit in the full weight of what your absence is teaching. This is why your calm matters here. If you respond too quickly, too warmly, too emotionally, you don't just reconnect, you interrupt the mirror. You remove the lesson. You give them comfort before they reach accountability. But if you stay grounded, if you stay steady, if you let absence do its work, the mirror keeps reflecting, and reflection is what creates real change. Because the mirror moment is the first time the avoidant can truly see you, not as an option, not as background comfort, but as a real loss. And once someone experiences real loss, they either grow, or they repeat the same pattern somewhere else, but they can't pretend anymore that what they had with you was ordinary, because your absence proved how rare your love actually was. The sixth keynote is the final payoff. The moment the avoidant tries to reopen the door, and the super empath proves they are truly detached. Because after the calm shock, after the 1,000 disappointments, after the loss of comfort, after the control panic, after the mirror of absence, there is usually one predictable move the avoidant makes. They reach out in a way that protects their pride. Not with full accountability at first, not with a clean apology, but with a breadcrumb, a small message that tests one thing. Do I still have access? This is where the old version of you used to collapse. This is where hope used to rush through your body like electricity. This is where you used to answer too fast, too warm, too open, because your heart was starving for connection and your nervous system was desperate for relief. A breadcrumb felt like rescue. A felt like a turning point. A small message felt like proof you mattered. But the super empath who is truly detached does something different. They don't melt. They don't rush. They don't perform. They don't over-explain. Because detachment is not silent waiting. It's silent choosing. It's the moment you stop placing your peace under someone else's control. It's the moment you stop treating their attention as medicine for your wounds. It's the moment you stop negotiating the basics of love, respect, consistency, accountability. And when you stop negotiating, you become a person the old dynamic cannot hook the same way. So the avoidance breadcrumb meets a new you, a you who no longer confuses contact with commitment, a you who no longer interprets a moment of softness as a promise of change, a you who understands that someone can miss you and still be incapable of loving you properly, a you who finally values stability more than chemistry. This is why the first breadcrumb often fails to pull you back when you're truly detached. Because true detachment isn't a technique, it's a nervous system shift. Your body is no longer addicted to the cycle. Your mind is no longer making excuses. Your heart is no longer translating their avoidance into potential. You still may feel sadness because you're human, but you are no longer willing to trade your self-respect for a few seconds of reassurance. And that's the pain the avoidant never expected. They expected you to be emotionally available even after the damage. They expected that your love would override your standards. They expected that if they came back with a little warmth, you'd forget the coldness. They expected you to be the same person who kept trying. But you are not that person anymore. Now here's where it gets serious. When your detachment is real, it forces the avoidant into a choice they can't avoid forever. If the avoidant only wanted access, they will test, retreat, test again, and eventually fade when they realize your door no longer opens easily. They may act confused, they may act offended, They may try to guilt you. They may say you're cold. They may say you're changing. Because that's how people react when they lose a benefit they felt entitled to. But if the avoidant truly values you, and if they have even a small amount of readiness, your detachment becomes the wake-up call. Not because you punished them, but because you stopped rescuing them from consequence. Consequence is what forces reality into someone's system. It teaches them, this time is different. And difference creates urgency. That's why you'll often see the avoidant escalate after the first breadcrumb doesn't work. They may message again, they may ask to talk, they may become more direct, or they may suddenly start showing signs of jealousy, asking subtle questions about your life, trying to figure out if you moved on. Again, not always because they're ready for love, but because they are trying to regain the one thing your detachment took away, certainty and control. And this is where your response matters. Not the perfect words, the perfect boundary. A super empath who is truly detached does not respond with anger and does not respond with desperation. They respond with clarity. They respond with calm standards. They move slowly. They watch actions, not words. They do not re-enter emotional intimacy because the avoidant seems sad. They require accountability, consistency, and real repair. Because the truth is, a breadcrumb is a shortcut back into the old cycle. It's the avoidant's attempt to restore comfort without doing the uncomfortable work of change. If you accept the shortcut, you teach them that they can return without transforming. If you refuse the shortcut, you teach them that the old version of you is gone. This is also where your identity shifts. You stop being the person who is proud of how much they can endure. You stop being the person who tries to prove love by staying through confusion. You become the person who proves love by honoring yourself. You stop chasing the feeling of being chosen, and you start choosing yourself every day. And here is the deepest emotional truth in this keynote. The super empath's detachment isn't meant to hurt the avoidant, it's meant to stop hurting the empath. It's not revenge, it's recovery. It's the moment your nervous system finally says, I will not live in emotional uncertainty anymore. It's the moment your heart finally understands that love should not require you to beg for basic communication. It's the moment your mind finally accepts that empathy without boundaries is self-abandonment. So when the avoidant reaches out, the detached empath doesn't rush to reconnect, they assess. They ask, is this access or accountability? Is this comfort or change? Is this loneliness or readiness? And if it's only access, they stay gone. If it's accountability, they move slowly, carefully, with standards, because true repair takes time, and the detached empath no longer trades their peace for potential. That is the final payoff. The avoidant expected the empath to stay emotionally available forever. But the empath became someone who can love deeply and still walk away cleanly. And that kind of detachment is not just an ending, it's an upgrade. Because once you detach at that level, you don't just stop chasing that person, you stop chasing anyone who makes you feel like love has to be earned through suffering.